So we have a barn built here. This is a typical bank barn, 3-bay bank barn, a smaller version. It was built in 1891 by Manford Moore. It has been in the family, passed on to Manford's son Earl and his grandson Albert. And Albert is in the process of passing the farm on to his grandson Alan Moore. So this is considered a century farm and has been in the family for 5 generations.
What crops and animals did you raise?
Buckwheat, wheat, oats, and corn, and potatoes. And that was a cash crop. The potatoes was a good cash crop. The other crops were for the animals. We raised pigs, sheep, and milk cows.
Okay.
And a beef cow once in a while. But we never ate much beef. We ate a lot of hog. We ate a lot of pork. And of course chickens, turkeys. That's about it.
Where did you sell your potatoes?
Pittsburgh. We trucked to Pittsburgh in the fall. Probably 5-6 tons of potatoes we do. That was tough picking. Bend over and put them in a bucket, get the dirt off of them and put them in a bucket. About days like this, wasn't quite this hot, but we have hot days in September.
Are you old enough to remember tractors had license plates? They stopped in 1958, I believe. But this is a 1954 tractor, and that is the exact license plate for a tractor. There was a very large apple orchard over there, and they grew potatoes up one hill and picked apples in the fall. And my dad's oldest brother lost a leg and had a wooden leg, so his working ability was somewhat limited, but he bought a truck and drove truck, and it was my Uncle Wayne, oldest uncle, hauled the produce, apple and potatoes, to Pittsburgh and sold them at the Strip District, which is still there in Pittsburgh, and that was their source of income. And I can tell you one other story. My dad was very concerned that during the Depression, they was going to lose the farm because they couldn't pay their taxes. And at that point, the electric was brought into our community of Hometown, and the crew that was doing the electric line was looking for somebody with a horse to pull up the poles and stretch the wire. And my dad applied for the job, and he got it, and that was a 10-hour day, and him and his horse got $5 a day, and that was enabled him to pay his taxes, and they didn't lose the farm. The cute part of that story is my dad showed up the first morning with his favorite horse, Old Prince, which I've heard about Old Prince a few thousand times. And the boss of the electric crew said, "Hey, you don't have any reins on that horse." I don't need any reins. That horse listens to me. Well, you might as well go home because we're not having an accident or anything because of some kind of a horse problem. And Dad convinced him to give him a try. And he pulled up the poles from Allen's Mills on through the woods, which we call Sauger, into Hometown. And that was how the electric came there. And when Old Prince was told to stop, he stopped. And when he was told to pull, he pulled. And they stretched the wires, pulled the poles up, and Dad never had a line on him. He obeyed his commands. And I've heard that story enough times.
My grandfather had dairy cattle. He was getting older and downsizing by the time I was here and growing up. But we had 2 or 3 cows. We always had a couple of pigs for meat and chickens for eggs. We had a big garden, tomatoes, corn, potatoes, beans, a lot of our own food. It was a self-sustaining farm. During the Great Depression, it had to be. Money was tight. My mother got through the Great Depression with 2 outfits. She'd wear one while the other was being laundered and then change them. It was a very self-sufficient operation at that time. But we grew enough that my grandmother and mother canned, and we lived on that during the winters. Most of our food came right off the farm.
I was just a little kid, and one day I went in the barn, and this old pig she was in like a pen, but she wasn't. And I was squealing like a little kid, I guess, would do. And she came out and got her mouth over right above my hip bone, but she couldn't. She had taken such a big gulp, or a big bite, she couldn't squeeze. My dad came out and hit her with a board, and she let go, and he was kind of scared, but didn't break no rib. That was my experience with her. But I raised pigs. I ran the farm for, after he died, for 3 or 4 or 5 years.
How did you bring the hay into the barn?
On a wagon, on a 4-wheel wagon. Had a hay loader pulled behind the wagon, and the hay went up. That's after we got a little further ahead, you know. Before it was with a pitchfork. Pitching on with a pitchfork. Now I had a cousin that helped do that, and
But it was loose.
yeah, it was loose. Oh yeah, it came in loose. Oh yeah, baler didn't come in real popular till after the war. But the hay loader, there was a hay loader you haul behind the wagon, and it picked the hay up and dumped the hay on the wagon. That was really nice. It always seemed to be hot, like today. You're making hay and the hay's falling down on you, part of it.
I grew up on this farm. I started working over on the Moore farm when I was 12, baling hay. Got paid a whopping 75 cents an hour. I thought I was rich. And we took in our hay loose here. We would rake it, go out with pitchforks, put it on a wagon, bring it in, put down the hay fork, lift it up and put it in the mow. My cousins always tried to hit me with hay when I was small, and I was tramping it down on the wagon, and later on I was pitching it up on, and my mother and my aunt were experts at it. We got the work done, but we enjoyed doing it.
I remember with my best friend, Polly, sleeping out in the barn in the summertime when school was out, probably 3 or 4 nights a week. We'd sleep down in the haymow and wake up to the men coming in to milk the cows in the morning. I did drive a hay wagon in the summer. All farm kids learn to drive pretty early, you know, and I'd help whenever they'd make hay.
My grandma would babysit myself and my 2 sisters on Friday nights when my parents went to another auction that they were running on the auction circuit. And so we would go over, we would play in the barn. My one sister was allergic to the hay, and we would sneak her into the barn, and then we would sneak her over to the shed, get her all dusted off. But Every time we did this, an hour later after we ate supper, she would get red and she would start sneezing. And Grandma would say, "You were in the barn, weren't you, Susie?" "Yes, you know you're not to go in the barn." And so I had those memories as a child going over there. I did my share as a teenager, a couple summers helping unload the hay and straw in the barn. My kids had that same privilege of helping unload the hay wagons, so we all had that experience.
You've got to watch it with today's machinery because of the steep hills. It's very easy to upset a tractor, but the horses did quite well. My grandfather farmed with horses, and I can remember riding a horse out to the field and watching, learning, and eventually doing. By the time I was 12, horses were gone and everybody was using tractors and machinery. We had a little Farmall Cub that I ran just right here. Did the mowing and hauled the hay wagon and the rake. We had an old rake, I think it's still in the back there, that one person would ride and somebody else would drive the tractor, and a smaller John Deere that we ran for baling hay and combining oats and wheat, putting in silage. We had 2 silos here, but they're long gone, deteriorated and pretty much fell down. But I remember thrashing machines doing the grain. They would set up the thrashing machine here on the barn bridge and have a tractor with a belt to power it, and men from all over the area would get together and do the grain, put it in the granary here, take some of it with them for pay for their labor. And that was always a big event. And they would go on then to the next farm and do the same thing. Everybody got together and worked as a group.
So I bought them in February, and I like to raise them, so.
The names for them?
Yeah, this one right here is Sock, since he has white feet. That one laying down is Oreo, and that one's Hannah.
There's a cement floor, but there's a divot in there, a couple of them, where the draft horses that sit there and rub their foot back and forth. Oh, really? It's like a bowl shape buried in the cement up here, you know? I grew up at Broadacres, the other family farm close by, and you know, we were always, between the two of them, we were always back and forth. My dad utilized both of them with his dad, Harry W., which I'm named after. They had chickens at the one farm and beef cows at this one. And so he was back and forth every day. My grandparents lived here until 1960 or 61, when my grandfather passed away at age 84 or something like that. I think it was a pretty brutal winter. He caught pneumonia and died. And, so then my dad and my mother farmed both places as Broadacres Incorporated. And like I say, the 10,000 laying hens, chickens, and I think at least 100 beef cows out here. He also had pigs at another farm. I heard 13 full-time employees, but I'm not positive of that. And doing very well. He won awards for being a very progressive farmer. Trying new things and to make things go, and who knows how it would have gone. He was killed in a farming accident. That farm and this farm both were covered in apple trees, and they also did potatoes, and I'm sure hay and small grains. I don't know much about the corn or what we know today. I know they didn't raise soybeans. That just wasn't done. The potatoes, if you go through the History Center and see, you'll find a lot of the old guys talk about when they were teenagers, that was their summer money, picking potatoes at Broadacres or Cloverdale. And, that was a big industry for this region. My family members still have some of the original paper potato sacks that are very similar to what you find in the grocery stores today, with the little vent window, and they had Broadacre potatoes and everything, like, to advertise for the farm. We had a farm market in the front half of the Broadacres barn, but my dad also supplied eggs and other products to all the riverside markets because that was his cousin that owned that, company. So from Franklin to Ty-Nesta, Johnstown area, he traveled around quite a bit. Did most of the deliveries in a pickup truck.
You know all about it. It was no different. Farming's tough. Today it's altogether different. You either make money or you go get a job somewhere.
I like the land. I like this property. It's someplace that you have a lot of memories built up from my grandfather and the stories that he and my grandmother would tell me about the people right after the Civil War on up, making a living here through bad winters and good, and some springs wet, some dry. You can't control the weather, but the farmers just lived with it, made the best of it. They didn't try to fight it. I don't think you can farm if you can't handle the weather.
I'm fourth generation. My son is involved also. He would be fifth. Noel would be the sixth generation that, is working around here on the farm and using the opportunity to, try things and grow things and just be involved in agriculture.
It's an amazing difference from city life to here, and the things you learn, and the lessons that aren't taught but are learned, I guess would be a good way to put it. There's a lot of memories here. Tractor seat and not a tractor seat. A lot of sweat on the ground, that's for sure. The older I get, the older he gets, the older my nieces, nephews, and kids get, just being around them together here and thinking back. There are lots of times I'm up there doing something and looking down here at everything, and that's a great view. And how many of my ancestors have stood in the same spot on the same dirt, owned by the same Wrights family, and thought the same thing, and how it's touching and moving how much this means. It's hard to explain, but when you think about it, generations upon 5 generations. 5's not a big number, but when you go back to the mid 1800s to now, that's a lot of years. That's a lot of family. That's a lot of friends. That's a lot of gatherings. Anybody that knows us knows that family's the most important thing, both mom's side and the right side, and it's just they're being able to share this with that many people is big. Especially, like I said, the older generations, my father, myself, and then my kids and nieces and nephews and siblings. It's nice to have that opportunity and then the memories that we're creating together.
About the Century Farm and everything like that, one of my greatest joys is I can go up on this hill and I own my dad's tractor, one of his tractors. And we do family get-togethers out here, picnics, reunions, whatever, and load up a hay wagon with relatives and go up on this hill and look down on this farm. I know my dad. I know my dad and my grandpa's all the same thing.
I love growing up there. And I still like the place.
It's home. Huh?
A lot of memories. More than you can ever. You'd have to write a book to put all your memories in. But that's me, Albert E. Albert E. Moore.
How old? You're 94.
94. I'm born in 30.